Hi class, this is David Fish and it's Monday afternoon, February 12th. I sent out an email saying that I needed to miss class tomorrow because of an emergency situation with my wife's cornea transplant. She's got some stitches coming loose, and so we're making a trip to Kansas City. We'll be there at 10:30 on Tuesday morning. Appreciate you pray for her. This may be something that's normal, but we want to make certain that everything is all right. And so, never done anything like this. Want to do a little bit of review, and basically what this will be some stuff from our textbook KMP. The other day in class, we looked at some of these instances of the aorist, the constative, the inceptive. No problem there. We also have some more categories. We looked at the culminative and ended with the nomic. And so right now what I want to do is I want to work with epistolary, futuristic, and dramatic. So the epistolary aorist is where the author writes from the perspective of the readers, but uses the aorist instead of what we might expect, the present tense. And many times the verb that will be used will be either grapho or pempo, having to do with writing or sending. And so here's an example out of Philemon 19. I, Paul. Notice that the verb here is a simple first aorist, but the translation makes that a present. I, Paul, write this with my own hand. Some other examples that our text gives out of Ephesians 6, we've got epempsa, nice first aorist, and the translation is I am sending, understood Tychicus, to you. And therefore I have sent him more eagerly. And so that's the epistolary aorist, once again, usually with the verb grapho or pempo. Then we have the futuristic aorist that describes an event that has not yet taken place. Daniel Wallace calls this the proleptic aorist. Some would call this the prophetic aorist. We've just used the term futuristic aorist. And so if we look at this text, we've got Jude 14. Notice we've got our aorist verb, but the translation is the Lord comes with thousands of his holy ones. Even though this is an aorist indicative verb, it has not yet taken place. Some more examples from the New Testament. Those whom he justified, he also glorified. Notice that aorist there, but it should be rather clear to us that the glorification has not yet occurred. It is considered certain. Okay, and so Jude 14 was the one we had on the other page, and so this would be the futuristic aorist. Then we have the dramatic aorist, which refers to an event that recently occurred, perhaps has present consequences, and many times you look for contextual markers, especially the particles arti and nun. Example here that we could give, Matthew 9:18. Look at the Greek, my daughter now died. This is dramatic. My daughter just now died. Some other examples, Luke 16:4. I knew literally what I should do. We just read this in Greek 3 this afternoon on Monday, February 12th. I have decided what to do. This is the guy that didn't know what he was going to do with the account that he had been fired by his master for not keeping good books. You can read in the context, the unjust but shrewd manager makes a strategic decision that will help him in the future. I've just decided what to do. And here, bring, a nice imperative, from the little fishies which you have now caught. Notice the presence of the particle noon, which is a contextual indicator that this is the dramatic. Just as I have briefly written just above. And so this is the dramatic aorist. We don't see it all that many times. So from this point on, we want to talk about the perfect tense and the pluperfect. I wanted to put both charts here so we can do a comparison. These charts come from KMP page 288. In the perfect, we've got the intensive. Down here in the pluperfect, we've got the intensive. In the perfect, we've got the consummative. Down here, we've got the consummative. We also have a dramatic and a gnomic and dramatic, gnomic, and iterative, but the other one that corresponds to what we have in the pluperfect from the perfect would be a present state, and here in the pluperfect, a past state. So let's talk about the perfect tense right now, and I think it would probably be helpful for us to see some of what our text says. From page 297, the perfect tense form, that is, state of aspect, is often described as conveying a completed action in the past that has continuing results. That is, the action itself is no longer being performed, but the consequences of that action still exist in the present. And this is in relation to the time of the author. Thus, gegroptai, the perfect of grapho, does not mean so much as it was written, but rather it stands written, highlighting the state of aspect there. From page 297, we continue. As we noted in chapter 7, the aspect of the perfect is described as stative, which is used when the author wants to focus on the state of being. Okay? According to Daniel Wallace, the state of aspect, I like this quote, is, quote, action is portrayed externally. Okay, that's our summary. That might be what we would call the perfective part of that, whereas the resultant state proceeding from the action is portrayed internally. And Wallace will say continuous state. I think between the two of those, this externally, you can see that that would be talking about the perfective, the internally, continuous state, the imperfective. Highlighted in blue, others have described the perfect tense as a combination of the aorist, that is completed action, perfective aspect, and the present, that is progressive nature, imperfective aspect, tense form. And so I'll remind you of this chart from page 231 in chapter 7, where you can see the circle representing the perfective, a circle representing the imperfective, and the union of those two circles would represent the perfect tense. Now concerning the perfect tense, from pages 297 and 298, we read this. Although the perfect is less common than the present, imperfect, future, and aorist tense forms, its presence is often more significant. And the footnote 39 says, Moulton notes that the perfect tense form is, quote, the most important exegetically of all the Greek tenses. And that's out of the 3 or 4 volume Greek grammar that was published by Macmillan. Going on to page 298, we see that really there is no English equivalent to the Greek perfect. And so many times in our English translation we will use a helping verb. Let's look at some of the uses there of the perfect tense. We've got first the intensive perfect, where it is emphasizing the present state of the verb that's brought about by a past action. And I just have this caution there that the phrase present state is important, but do not confuse this with what is called a different category, the present state perfect, that we'll look at in just a little bit. And so some examples here: your sins are forgiven you. The emphasis is on the final state of the person as being forgiven. Some other examples: it is written that Christ should suffer. Look at this nice perfect tense verb, I have believed. But the emphasis on the resulting state is, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God. That's from John 11. We read that earlier. 1 Corinthians 15:13, but if there is no resurrection of the dead, then Christ is not risen. Of course, there is a resurrection of the dead, and so Christ is risen. You say, I'm rich, I have become wealthy, out of Revelation, not Revolution, 3:17, and that emphasizes the state as well. Then we have the consummative perfect, which emphasizes the completed action that brought about that resulting state. And I'd like to note that this is the stative aspect using the perfect tense form when combined with what we call the culminative aorist. And so some examples there. I have fought the good fight. In other words, that fight is over. Paul says, I've finished my course. Some other examples of this would be, your faith has healed you. It is over. John 1:34, we read this last semester. I have seen and I have testified that he is the Son of God. And then one of our favorite passages from the last week of Jesus' life, the Tetelestai, where Jesus says, it is finished. Notice the note there, the lexical meaning finish and the perfect tense form combined to emphasize the completion of Jesus' ministry. And Galatians 1:9, as we have said before, now we say again. And so we've got also the dramatic perfect, which vividly portrays a past event or state of affairs. This is like a stative aspect that's combined with what we saw with the dramatic aorist that emphasize what has just now taken place. And so our example there, Matthew 13:46, he went and he sold all things whatsoever he had. Some more examples of this from our text. John testified concerning him and exclaimed. Remember from our discussion of the dramatic aorist, many times it included a statement that was said. Here, I had no rest in my spirit, 2 Corinthians 2:13. 2 Corinthians 11:25, 3 times I was beaten with rods, once I was stoned, 3 times I was shipwrecked. I have spent, notice that's a perfect of poieo, a night and a day in the depths of the sea. And then we come to this present state perfect, and so remember we had present state in our first definition, and so this is used with certain verbs that lost their perfect significance and convey a present tense form meaning. You can see the examples we've got. We've got oida, I know, esteka, I stand, pepoitha, I am persuaded, and this one, I remember. And so you can see how the definition of the intensive perfect could trick you right here. And so an example there, Mark 10:19, simply, you know the commandments. By form, this is a perfect tense form, but we're talking about a present state perfect, and so particularly we learned in Greek 1 even that the verb oida is perfect in form, but translated as a simple present. This is the present state perfect. And so other examples, this one using histemi, Your mother and your brothers are standing outside, focusing on that stative aspect. What is the state of the mother and brothers? They are standing, but our verb is a nice perfect tense form. Now we know you have a demon. We translated this, John 8:52. The form is a perfect tense form, but we translate that as a simple present. I know and am persuaded by the Lord Jesus. And then 1 Corinthians 11, we've got our remember word. I praise you because you remember me in all things. Okay? And so that's the perfect tense form, which is translated as a present tense. And then we've got our good old friend, the gnomic, which communicates a customary or general truth. But when we have a gnomic perfect, the emphasis will be on the stative aspect. And so anyone who does not believe, and we've got this contextual clue, already is judged. Some more examples there. Whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats. That seems to be generally true. Got the gnomic. A wife is bound as long as her husband is living. He looks at himself. He goes away. Notice that is op erkomai, but it's a perfect tense. And right away, this is our right away word, eutheos, forgets what kind of man he was. And so that is the example of that. Then we've got our iterative perfect. We're familiar with the iterative word, where the action of the verb occurred at intervals across time. Now, I might note that the knowledge of the context helps us to see those intervals. 1 John 1:1, that which we have seen with our eyes, but that seeing that the apostles did occurred over intervals, over 3 years of ministry with Jesus. No one has ever seen God, John 1:18. The Father who sent me has himself testified about me. And we saw this in translation in John 8, and I was thinking, what, are these Jewish people idiots? They say, we've never been enslaved to anyone. Did they read Old Testament history? Did they notice that the Roman soldiers were in Jerusalem? And so these are examples that we would give. Now, we move to the pluperfect tense. One of the things that I might mention about pluperfect is, remember when we were in chapter 7 and we were talking about verbal aspect, we talked about the perfect tense as non-past stative. The pluperfect will be past stative. And so we've had the same thing, the intensive pluperfect, which is going to emphasize past results brought about by past action. And so here we have this example. Notice our pluperfect form there, in whom they had believed. If it were perfect, it would be in whom they have believed, but we've got this pluperfect form there. Notice that epsilon iota, in whom they had believed. Some other examples that you can see out of Matthew 12. If you had known what this means, and I've just added to the text that comes from our textbook, that obviously is a part of a second-class conditional sentence, because we've got the if with a, we do have a past tense verb, and so in the rest of the sentence we would have also a past tense verb, and sometimes we'd have on. Luke 4:29, they brought him to the edge of the hill their town was built on. Okay, there is our pluperfect form. John 6:17, they started across the sea to Capernaum. It was dark. That's pluperfect. Notice the epsilon iota there of ginomai, and Jesus had not yet come to them. Then we have the consummative pluperfect, which is going to emphasize the completion of a past action. Let's look at the example there. John 4:8, we also had translated that. We'll notice this pluperfect form. We might notice there is a reduplication there. There is an augment, and then we have this epsilon iota. The disciples had gone into town. Some other examples, John 9:22, since the Jews, here's our augment, here's our epsilon iota. It is an augment. We've got our reduplication, the teth there, and our epsilon iota, since the Jews had already agreed. Acts 8, there was an Ethiopian eunuch who had come. This is the non-compound pluperfect form of erchomai. He had come to Jerusalem. And Acts 20, verse 38, being sorrowful most of all because of the word he had spoken. You've got that epsilon iota, which gives us the clue that it is a pluperfect. Then we have the past state pluperfect. This is going to be the one that corresponds with the present state perfect, which once again is used of certain verbs. We've got oida, we've got histemi, we've got a word that talks about what was customary, we've got arpetho, and we've got parhistemi. And example, because they knew him. If oida is translated as a present, then this past tense form, even though it's a pluperfect tense form, is translated as a simple past, because they knew him. Some more examples. His mother and his brothers were standing there. You see that epsilon iota, which is a key, outside. Matthew 27:15. Now, at the feast, the governor was accustomed. This is the word which talks about custom or practices to release for the crowd one prisoner. Okay. Luke 11:22. He takes from him all of the weapons. Here's all of the weapons in which he had trusted. And so it becomes he takes from him all the weapons he trusted in. And two men stood by them. And so once again, this is for verbs that are kind of like oida and others. Even though it's a pluperfect form, we would translate it as a simple past tense. Now, basically, I've gone through what I wanted to go through, and so I want to just make an important announcement. Because our class will not meet on Tuesday, February 13th, on Wednesday, by the way, happy Valentine's Day, the only thing we will do will be translation from John. We will do Tuesday's translation and we will do Wednesday's translation. So what that means is we'll begin in John 12:37, finish that chapter, begin chapter 13, and go through 13:11. And then on Thursday, we'll do our regularly assigned translation from John, and we will do the exercises from our textbook KMP, page 308. Now, the translation portion of chapter 9 comes from John 11:30-34, and so we won't be doing that once again. We've already covered it. You might want to review that. You might want to read through the reading notes. And so let me just ask you right now, we will be at the doctor's office, Kansas City, 10:30 on Tuesday morning. Would appreciate you pray for her, is a little bit disconcerting, a little bit uncomfortable for us, and we hope to receive a report that this is kind of standard operating procedure, and if we've got stitches that need to come out, that they'll come out, and the rest of the recovery will continue on. So I thank you very much. Blessings to you, and I will look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday morning at 8.